Is Bob Chapman of the International Forecaster. Hi, Bob. How are you doing? Oh, I guess we don't have Bob on the line. Hopefully we'll have him here very soon. But I think he's already connected with us. I think he's talking to our producer. So I hope she's going to pass him over here. There we are. Hi, Bob. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
I got a couple of questions for you. Certainly, of course, we heard President Obama saying over the weekend, we're just trying to get the banks lending. We're just trying to get the banks lending. But so much of what's going on seems to me that it's just actually the opposite. Certainly, the idea that the Federal Reserve Board would be paying the banks interest on the reserves first time in history so they could soak up an awful lot of the reserves. But then there are two other things in the offing which I think will let us know exactly what they intend. One of them is the idea that they're going to actually require the banks to change their means of evaluating of their assets, and of course mark them not at mark to market rather than on what they paid for them, which would mean that many of our banks would become insolvent. The other is the fact that the FDIC is planning on, or was planning on, assessing the banks a massive amount of money so FDIC could replenish its treasury, but that of course would make a lot of our banks insolvent, or they would certainly not have any money to lend out. What's the status of those two issues?
Well, I think the latter is history, and the reason why is the FDIC has asked for $500 billion from the government.
All right, are they going to get it from the government rather than the banks then?
Yeah, that's the intention, and I'm sure that's the way it will happen.
Okay.
And the hue and cry regarding that came from the small and medium-sized banks that said, hey, we get great books, we get a great balance sheet. Sure, we get problems, but nothing like with the big banks. And we're just not going to stand by and watch these big banks act like gambling casinos, and we have to pay for it. That's not right. And so I guess they had enough complainants that they said, okay, we'll go to the government and get it. And so that's what will happen to that. And the money that you're talking about, in part, that stands on the bank's balance sheets but is sitting over at the Fed making interest, that money, of course, does exist. But a good part of that money that was given as loans to these banks went out in dividends and in salaries and bonuses to the employees, all of whom are Illuminists. And this whole effort really is nothing more nor less, and I know that there's this feint to the side, meaning they're going to throw a bone here and there to mortgage holders, and they're going to try to keep it from getting any worse than it is. But the real emphasis is to pour trillions of dollars into the banks so when the bottom falls out, the big banks will survive.
Well, of course, the big banks will survive as long as we keep giving them money, but I don't think they're as bad off as they let us be. I believe the big banks are intentionally not lending the money because they want this crisis. But hang on there. We'll be back in just a moment right here at Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty. Our guest is Bob Chapman, and he's with the International Forecaster, and he's with us every Monday afternoon as we talk about what's going on here in the United States financially, and we find out a couple of 100,000 homes were foreclosed on just this last month. Suddenly a couple of million homes were foreclosed on, at least my understanding, last year. Well over 650,000 people lost their jobs last month. Things are really going from bad to worse. Of course, the president claims they're doing everything they can to remedy the situation, but I really fear that certainly the big banks are not going to start lending because they want to precipitate this crisis. That these banks have literally trillions of dollars, and they have the ability to, by the reserve principle, to lend 10 to 1, many times much more than that. Bob, how much can a regular bank, increase their lending? Can they go 10 to 1? Which banks can go 40 to 1?
Well, 40 to 1 is what Bank of America is right now.
Are they really
been that way for some time?
They can lend $40 for every dollar that they have on deposit.
Right.
Well, then,
so all the others have got to be in the same general category.
Well, then why in heaven's name is there a shortage of money to lend?
There isn't. They're holding it back.
And
they're making it more difficult to borrow as well.
Right, and because they're raising the interest rates, as a lot of times, even the major corporations borrowing $300 or $400 or $500 million are going to have to be putting out, 10-15% interest, and you can't do that and make a profit. So they're really destroying a lot of the industries by either not lending or by, lending at exorbitant rates. Would that be a fair appraisal?
It's a fair appraisal.
Well, no,
and the new program that has been brought on for $1 trillion by the Treasury Department is nothing more than a rehash of the program that was a failure 6 months ago under Paulson. And so this isn't going to go anywhere. They're just buying time until they've hit the right spot to pull the plug. It could be 2 months from now. It could be 3.25 years from now. I don't know, and neither does anybody else. And I don't think they know either. They got to wait for the right spot. And I would think an extension of the war would happen. I got a new subscriber today who is going over to Afghanistan, and I told him you can subscribe.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Bob was just saying that he has a new subscriber who's going over to Afghanistan. And what were you going to say?
I said I'll take your subscription as long as you transfer the publication, by email to as many people as you know over there to read it.
All right, fine. Well, I think it's important to get certainly our people in the military to understand this scam, this charade. Why are we fighting in Afghanistan? Well, the president said we're fighting there because we want to protect the people in the United States, and we can't allow Al-Qaeda to be plotting against us. Well, Al-Qaeda weren't plotting against us before we went over there and attacked them. If you've ever read the complete report of the September 11th committee, the staff report said that none of the Al-Qaeda leaders other than Osama bin Laden, whose family is very close to the Bush family, none of the Al-Qaeda leaders wanted to attack the United States. And the only reason, of course, they would even consider it is because we have attacked them and we've killed their people and we've killed so many innocent people over there. And, of course, why are we fighting in Afghanistan when Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden are over there in Pakistan, supposedly? Nobody can really explain why we're fighting there, other than we want to fight a war. And that is the tragedy of all this. In fact, the people in Al-Qaeda in 40 nations, are we going to attack 40 nations? All we do by attacking is get more and more, Muslim people recruited into this radical form of Islam. This was latent until the CIA began funding this whole thing during the Afghan war. And it's about time the American people do understand that one of the major benefits of the Afghan war is to recruit more people into Al-Qaeda, not, of course, to discourage it. So, anyway, Bob, certainly one question, though, you didn't answer was, what about this appraisal? We kind of require the banks to state their assets not at mark to market. In other words, not what they're worth now, but at what they're worth now rather than what they paid for them. And this would make a lot of our banks insolvent. Is that going to go through or not? Because it's within the next couple of weeks where they're going to have to.
Is the rule going to be executed, and I do not think it will be. At the last minute, they'll say, no, we can't do that.
Well, I mean, it would destroy a lot of our smaller banks.
Well, I don't know about the smaller banks. They don't have problems. Some of them do, but not many. Nor the medium-sized banks. It's the big banks that got the problems. They're the ones who did all that crazy lending.
All right, fine. Well, it would really just be disastrous for our banking systems. So I think we will know really whether they really want to destroy the banking system by whether or not that they go ahead with that requirement for mark-to-market assessment of securities. I think this is a very important thing to issue. I don't think most people even understand what they're talking about. Could you explain it to our listeners, Bob? Because I think it's a very important thing that they would even consider this at this time, in the economic cycle and when we're having a severe recession. So they changed the accounting rules for our banks and financial institutions. Could you explain why this is such a disastrous policy?